Ade Johnson has always been a man of strong will. He was respected in his community, not just because he had worked as a senior accountant for years, but because he carried himself like a man who had everything under control. At 65, he still worked with the confidence of his youth, believing that time had not diminished his importance. His wife, Folake, has been by his side for over 30 years, a woman of patience, endurance, and grace. She had given her best to their marriage, raising their two sons, Tunde and Wale, to become responsible men. But Ade had never been the type to openly appreciate sacrifices. He saw them as a woman's duty rather than an act of love. As the years goes by, Ade grew more restless. The days seemed dull, and he found himself craving excitement. He looked at Folake and saw a woman who had aged, her hair a streak of grey, and her once slender figure had filled out with time. Though she was still beautiful, her beauty was no longer the kind that made head turn on the street. It annoyed him that she was always tired, that she no longer dressed up the way she used to, that she found joy in small things like reading a devotional or visiting their grandchildren. He felt stuck in routines, as if life had nothing new to offer him. One evening, as Folake served him his dinner, he pushed the plate aside with a sigh. "This food doesn't taste the way it used to," he muttered. She looked at him, surprised. "But Ade, it's the same way. I've always cooked it." He scoffed. "Maybe that is the problem. Everything feels the same. The same food, the same house, the same you." His words stung, but she swallowed her pain. "Change is part of life, Ade. We are growing older." But Ade didn't want to accept that reality. Instead, he started spending more time outside the house. He changed the way he dressed, bought expensive perfume, and began staying out late. When Folake asked, he dismissed her concern, telling her she was overthinking. In truth, he had already made up his mind about something dangerous. He wanted something new, something fresh. He was convinced that life had more to offer him than the routine he had settled into. Ade had always believed that a man should have control over his own life. To him, age was just a number, and he refused to be bounced by the expectations of society. He had seen other men his age remarry younger women, and in his mind, they were living better lives, filled with energy, passion, and excitement. He convinced himself that he deserved more, that he had worked too hard in his younger age to settle for a quiet, uneventful old age. The thought consumed him, and soon he found himself entertaining the idea of bringing a new wife into his life. At first, he was subtle about it. He started admiring younger women from a distance, paying attention to the way they laugh, the way they dress, and how they carry themselves with youthful energy. It wasn't long before he met someone who caught his attention. Zainab, a beautiful woman in her mid-20s who worked as a sales girl at a boutique he frequented. She had bright eyes, a charming smile, and a way of speaking that makes him feel young again. Unlike Folake, who always reminded him to take his medication and question his late night, Zainab made him feel free. She giggled at his jokes, complimented his look, and treated him like a king whenever he visited. It started with the small things. He bought her gifts, sent her money, and in return, she showered him with sweet words that inflated his ego. "Daddy Ade, you are so strong for your age," she would say, stroking his hand playfully. "Any woman who has you is lucky." Those words filled his heart with a foolish sense of pride. He began comparing her to Folake, who no longer flattered him or paid him the attention he craved. Slowly, resentment towards his wife grew. Though she had done nothing wrong, one night, after coming home late, he sat across from Folake, watching her as she folded their grandson's clothes. She looked so peaceful, yet all he could see was a woman who had nothing new to offer him. Without thinking, he blurted out, "Folake, I want to marry another wife." She froze, her hands gripping the fabric. Slowly, she lifted her head to look at him, confusion clouding her eyes. Ade, what did you just say? I said, I want to take another wife, he repeated, his tone firm. I am still a man. I deserve to enjoy the rest of my life with someone who had energy, something young. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Folake let out a quiet laugh, one that was more of disbelief than amusement. Ade, after 30 years of marriage, this is what you are telling me? He crossed his arm. I'm not asking for permission. I'm simply informing you. Folake's heart shattered, but she refused to break down in front of him. Instead, she stood up, placed the folded clothes aside, and walked out of the room without another word. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where she has gone wrong. She had given him everything, her youth, her loyalty, her life, and now, just because time has passed, he wanted to replace her. A deep pain settled in her chest. But she knew one thing for sure, she would not beg him to stay. The morning after Ade's shocking declaration, Folake woke up with a heavy heart. She moved through the house mechanically, preparing breakfast as she always did. But something inside her felt broken. She watched as Ade sat at the dining table, reading his newspaper as if nothing had happened the night before. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her pain. It was as if she had become invisible to him. Tunde and Wale, their two sons, arrived later that afternoon. Folake had called them, not to beg them to stop their father, but to inform them of what was happening. She had given her life to this family, and they deserved to know that the foundation was cracking. As soon as they walked in, they went straight to their father. Papa, what is this we are hearing? Wale asked, his voice laced with disbelief. You want to take another wife? Ade folded his hands. I'm still a man, he said stumbling, and I want to enjoy my life. What is wrong with that? Tunde clenched his fist. And Mama? What happened to her? After everything she has done for you? Ade scoffed. She had had her time. I need a fresh start. Folake sat quietly, watching her sons defend her, but she knew their father too well. Ade was a proud man, and once he made up his mind, nothing could change it. So when Wale turned to her and said, Mama, talk to him, she shook her head. There's nothing to say, she replied, her voice calm but firm. Your father is a grown man. He has made his choice, and so have I. Ade frowned. What does that mean? Folake stood up, adjusting her wrapper. It means I will not live under the same roof as your new wife. If you bring her here, I will leave. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Ade's face. He had expected her to cry, to beg him to stay, but she was doing the exact opposite. She was letting him go. Wale turned to his father, his voice filled with anger. You are making the biggest mistake of your life, Papa. Ade waved him off. You are too young to understand. One day, you will see that I am right. Folake walked to the bedroom and started packing a small bag. She had spent 30 years of her life in this house, but she refused to spend another day where she was not valued. She had loved Ade, but love without respect was nothing. And so, with her head held high and her dignity intact, she walked out of the home she had built, leaving Ade alone with his foolishness. Folake did not cry as she walked out of the house she has lived in for 30 years. She did not look back, nor did she let regret weigh her down. She had made up her mind she would not beg a man who had chosen to throw away everything they had built together. Tunde and Wale followed her closely, helping her into the car they had arranged to take her to a new home. They had rented a small but comfortable apartment in a quiet part of Ibadan. It was nothing compared to the house she had shared with Ade, but it was peaceful, and that was all she needed. As she stepped into the new space, she took a deep breath and exhaled, releasing the years of sacrifice that had gone unnoticed. This was a new beginning for her. This might not be what she had planned, but she will make the best of it. Meanwhile, Ade was left alone in the house, expecting to feel a sense of victory now that Folake was gone. But the moment the door closed behind her, an airy silence filled the air. The house, which had once been warm and full of life, suddenly felt cold. He tried to convince himself that he had made the right decision, that this was what he wanted. After all, he had Zainab, the beautiful young woman who had promised to bring excitement back into his life. 2 weeks later, he brought her into the house, eager to start his new and exciting life. At first, it was exactly what he had imagined. Zainab was full of energy, always laughing, always playful. She dressed in bright, fashionable clothes, cooked exotic meals, and showered him with compliments that fed his pride. When he walked through the neighborhood with her, men looked at him with envy, and he basked in the attention. But slowly, small cracks began to appear. Zainab was not like Folake. She did not wake up early to prepare his bath water. She did not cook every day, nor did she wait on him like a devoted wife. Instead, she spent most of her time on her phone, chatting and laughing with people he didn't know. She would come home late, wearing perfume that did not belong to him. And when he asked questions, she simply rolled her eyes and walked away. For the first time, that crept into Ade's heart. Had he made a mistake? At first, Ade tried to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in his chest. He reminded himself why he had chosen this new wife. Zainab was young, vibrant, and beautiful. She made him feel young again, but the illusion didn't last long. It started with little things. One evening, Ade returned home early than usual, expecting to be greeted with a warm meal and Zainab's sweet voice calling him Daddy Ade. Instead, he found an empty house. The lights were off, the air was still, and there was no sign of his wife. He checked the time, 8:30 p.m. By 10 p.m., she still wasn't home. His stomach grumbled in hunger, but there was no food in the kitchen. Frustrated, he picked up his phone and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. Her voice casual. "Where are you?" he demanded. "I went out," she replied nonchalantly. "You went out without telling me? And what about dinner?" There was silence on the other end before she chuckled. "Daddy Ade, must I always cook? You have 2 hands. If you are hungry, there's rice in the cupboard. Cook it." Ade's hand trembled with anger as he hung up the call. He had never been spoken to like that in his own home, but he swallowed his pride, convincing himself that she was just being playful. He tried cooking the rice, but after years of not stepping into the kitchen, he made a mess of it. That night, he slept on an empty stomach, something that had never happened when Folake was around. The next few weeks only got worse. Zainab stopped pretending to be the sweet, obedient wife he thought he had married. She barely spoke to him at home, always glued to her phone. When he asked her to do something for him, she would sigh loudly and roll her eyes as if it was a burden. She also started dressing in revealing clothes, going out late at night without an explanation. And then came the worst part. She started coming home in the early hours of the morning, reeking of expensive perfume that Ade did not buy for her. One evening, as Ade sat in the living room, she heard a car horn outside. She walked to the window and peered through the curtains. To his shock, he saw Zainab stepping out of a flashy black car. A young man sat in the driver's seat, watching her with a smile. She leaned into the car, whispered something to him, and laughed before slamming the door shut. Ade felt his heart clenched. His breath came in short gaps. He had spent years thinking Folake was boring, but at least she had been loyal. What had he done? Ade could no longer ignore the truth. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. Zainab was not the sweet, submissive wife he had imagined. She was reckless, disrespectful, and worst of all, shameless about it. But his pride kept him from admitting it to anyone, even to himself. That night, after watching her step out of another man's car, he confronted her. Who was that? He asked, his voice sharp. Zainab barely looked at him as she tossed her handbag on the couch. A friend. A friend? His chest tightened with anger. What kind of friend drops you home this late at night? She turned to him, crossing her hands. Ah, Daddy Ade, must you know everything? Do I question where you go or what you do? Ade clenched his fist. I am your husband. You owe me respect. Zainab laughed. A short, mocking sound that made his blood boil. Respect? You must be joking. You think because you married me, I will sit here and worship you like your old wife did? For a moment, he was speechless. His own wife was insulting him in his own house. He had never felt this kind of humiliation before, but he still tried to hold into the last shred of control he had left. Zainab, I took you from nothing. I gave you a home, a name, and everything you could ever want. She smacked, and I gave you excitement, so we are even. Ade felt a sharp pain in his chest, but it wasn't physical. It was the pain of regret. He had thought he was gaining something by marrying a younger woman, but now he saw the truth. He had traded a good wife for an illusion. He had been blinded by vanity and had lost something far more valuable than he could ever replace. The next few weeks were torture. Zainab no longer pretended to respect him. She stayed out as long as she wanted, dressed however she pleased, and even stopped making excuses for her late nights. One evening, she overheard her talking on the phone. My love, I miss you too. Don't worry about my old man. He is harmless. Yes, yes, I will see you soon. Ade felt his body shaking with fury. He had never been a weak man, but at that moment, he felt completely powerless. He had no control over his own home, no authority over his new wife, and worst of all, he had no one to turn to. He had pushed away the one woman who had truly loved him, and now he was living in the prison he had built for himself. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart heavy with shame. He had thought he was gaining happiness, but all he had gained was loneliness, and the worst part, he knew it was only going to get worse. Ade's once vibrant spirit had withered under the weight of his own regrets. Every morning, he woke up to an empty house that no longer felt like a home. The presence of Zainab, the woman he had once thought would bring him joy, now suffocates him. She treated him like an afterthought, coming and going as she pleased, with no regard for the man who had given her everything. The once proud Ade was now a shadow of himself. His heart heavy with the realization that he had lost the only person who had truly loved him, Folake. One evening, as he sat alone at the dining table staring at a cold plate of food Zainab had carelessly left on the counter, a deep longing overwhelmed him. He missed the warmth of his wife's home-cooked meals, the way she would sit with him and ask about his day, the way she had cared for him even when he didn't deserve it. But how could he face her now, after all he had done? Would she even listen to him? He buried his face in his hands, ashamed of the man he had become. Desperate for guidance, Ade decided to seek help. Early the next morning, he made his way to the church where he and Folake had once worshipped together. He hadn't stepped foot in the building since she left, but now he felt like a lost man searching for salvation. He walked in slowly, his heart pounding as he approached the pastor. a wise and kind man who had known him for many years. "Pastor, I have made a terrible mistake," Ade confessed, his voice trembling. "I let pride and foolishness destroy my home. I pushed my wife away, and now I don't know how to fix it." The pastor studied him for a moment before responding. "Brother Ade, you are not the first man to make mistakes, but you must understand that actions have consequences. Seeking forgiveness is not just about words, it's about true repentance. Have you humbled yourself before God? Have you thought about what your wife went through because of your decisions?" Ade swallowed hard, tears welling in his face. "Pastor, I regret everything. I thought I was gaining happiness, but I only found pain. I lost a woman who gave me her all. I don't deserve her forgiveness, but I need to try. Please help me." The pastor sighed deeply. God forgive those who are truly repentant, but you must also understand that forgiveness does not mean things will go back to the way they were. Your wife may have found peace without you. If you truly love her, you must respect her decision, whatever it may be. Ade nodded slowly, the weight of the truth settling in his heart. He had to find the courage to face Folake, not just to seek forgiveness, but to accept whatever choice she made. That night, as he lay in bed, he knew what he had to do. Tomorrow, he would go to Folake and ask her for forgiveness. Not because he expected her to take him back, but because it was the right thing to do. Ade woke up the next morning with a heaviness in his heart, but for the first time in months, there was also clarity. He had spent too much time wallowing in regret, and now it was time to face the consequences of his action. He dressed in a simple outfit, avoiding the flashy clothes he once worn to impress Zainab. There was no one left to impress, only a broken marriage to make amends for. His feet felt heavy as he made his way to Folake's apartment. He hadn't seen her in months, yet every detail of her face was still clear in his mind. As he stood at the door, his hands trembled before he finally knocked. A few moments later, the door opened, and there she stood, strong, composed, and more radiant than he remembered. She was wearing a simple but elegant dress, her hair neatly tied back, and there was a glow about her that made his heart ache with even more regret. Folake stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking. "What do you want, Ade?" Her voice was calm but firm. Ade took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Folake, please, I need to talk to you." She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. "You have 5 minutes. Ade entered the apartment, looking around at the place that had now become her home. It was modest, but it was peaceful, filled with warmth. Something his heart had lost the day she left. He turned to face her, and for the first time in years, he let go of his pride. "Folake, I have come to ask for your forgiveness," he said, his voice shaking. I was a fool. I let my pride and foolishness destroy everything we built together. I thought I needed something new, something exciting, but all I found was misery." He lowered his head, ashamed. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away like it meant nothing. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am begging for it." Folake remained silent, watching him with an unreadable expression. Finally, she sighed. "Ade, do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't that you wanted another wife. It was the way you discarded me, as if the years we spent together meant nothing. Do you know how painful it was to be told that I was no longer useful to you?" Tears welled in Ade's eyes. "I know, Folake, and if I could take it back, I would. I regret it more than you could ever imagine." Folake studied him for a long time, as if searching for the truth in his words. Then she let out a slow breath. "Ade, I forgave you a long time ago, not for your sake, but for mine. I refuse to carry bitterness in my heart, but forgiveness does not mean I will return to the life I left behind." Ade's heart clenched. Folake, please. I will do anything to fix this. She shook her head. Some things cannot be fixed, Ade. I have found peace here and I will not trade it for another chance to be hurt again. Ade's leg felt weak, but he nodded slowly. He had hoped for a second chance, but he now realized that the damage he had done was irreversible. He had made his choice and now he had to live with it. As he walked out of Folake's apartment, he felt both sorrow and relief. He had asked for forgiveness and she had given it to him, but not in the way he had expected. He had wanted to restore what was lost, but some losses could never be undone. For the first time, he understood what true regret felt like. Not just the pain of making a mistake, but the pain of knowing that some mistake could never be erased. Ade walked away from Folake's apartment with a heavy heart, feeling the full weight of his mistakes. He had come seeking a second chance, hoping that she could take him back. But instead, she had given him something else, closure. And now, he had to live with the reality he had created for himself. When he returned to his house, it no longer felt like a home. Zainab was nowhere to be found, and for once, he was grateful for the silence. He slumped into the chair, staring at the empty space in front of him. The house was just as big as before, but without Folake, he felt hollow, lifeless. He thought about all the times she had cooked his meals, laid out his clothes, and prayed for him while he slept. He had taken all of it for granted, and now he had lost it all forever. Days passed, and Zainab became even more distant. She stopped pretending to care about him altogether. She would leave in the morning and not return until late at night. When he questioned her, she would simply laugh and say, "Old man, stop stressing yourself." One night, after waiting for her until past midnight, he heard the familiar sound of a car outside. He peered through the curtain and saw her stepping out of another man's car, giggling as she whispered to him before closing the door. The rage inside Ade boiled over. He stormed to the door and flung it open. "Zainab," he bellowed. She barely looked at him as she walked past, chewing gum loudly. "What is it now, Ade?" she asked with irritation. Ade clenched his fist. "You come home at this hour from another man's car and you don't even have the decency to explain yourself?" Zainab smacked, tossed her handbag on the couch. "Explain what? You married me because you wanted a young wife, isn't it? Now you have one. This is how young people live." Ade felt like the air has been knocked out of him. The woman he had sacrificed his marriage for didn't even respect him. She didn't see him as a husband, only as an ATM. His body trembled as he realized the full extent of his foolishness. "Zainab, I gave you everything," he whispered, his voice filled with pain. She rolled her eyes. "And I gave you excitement, so let's call it even." With that, she turned and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Ade sank into his chair, gripping his chest. His breathing became ranged, his body weak. Regret was eating him alive. He had thought he was making the best decision of his life, but now he saw the truth. He had destroyed himself with his own hands, and there was nothing he could do to turn back time. The days that followed were even worse. Zainab stopped cooking entirely, spending most of her time on the phone with other men and acting like Ade didn't exist. His head began to fail rapidly. His blood pressure spiked and his heart felt heavier with each passing day. He could barely eat, barely sleep. He had spent his whole life thinking he was the master of his own fate, but now he was just a lonely old man, abandoned by the very woman he had chosen. One evening, as he sat in the empty living room, the realization hit him like a thunderbolt. He had lost everything: his wife, his family, his peace, his happiness, and worst of all, he had no one to blame but himself. Ade's body had grown weak, his spirit crushed under the weight of his regret. He had always believed that life would favor him, that he could make any choice he wanted and simply walk away without consequences. But life had proven him wrong. Now, as he sat alone in his large but empty house, he realized that he had traded gold for dust, loyalty for deception, love for lust, and he had lost everything. One fateful morning, he woke up to an unusual silence. Zainab, who usually played loud music and laughed on the phone for hours, was nowhere to be found. He struggled to his feet, his hands shaking as he made his way to the living room. The sight that met him made his heart drop. Everything was gone. The expensive furniture he had bought, the television, even his personal belongings. His wardrobe has been empty, his bank documentation missing. The house has been stripped bare, like a carcass picked clean by vultures. His breathing became erratic as he stumbled towards the front door, flinging it open. His neighbor Babatunde stood outside with a look of pity in his eyes. "Ade," he said softly, shaking his head. "She left early this morning. I saw her loading things into a truck with a young man." Ade's knee buckled and he clutched his chest. No, that's not possible." His voice was barely a whisper. Babatunde sighed. "She said you were traveling and needed her to sell the house. She took everything. Ade, everything." Ade staggered backward, his world spinning. He had given Zainab his heart, his home, his wealth, only to be discarded like an old newspaper. A sharp pain shot through his chest and he gasped, gripping the door frame for support. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might collapse right there. Later that evening, his sons Tunde and Wale arrived to find their father sitting on the cold floor, staring blankly at the empty house. He was not the strong, proud man they once knew. He was a broken shell, a man who had lost everything, including his dignity. Wale sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "Papa, where will you stay now?" Ade didn't answer. His throat was dried, his voice stolen by shame. Tunde looked at his brother. "We will rent a small place for him," he said, his tone filled with disappointment. And so, the once proud Ade Johnson moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the home he once ruled. Every day, he sat by the window watching the world move on without him. He thought about Folake, about the love he has thrown away for nothing. He thought about the home he had lost, the laughter that once filled his life. He thought about the foolish choices he had made, the pride that had blinded him, the emptiness that now consumed him. But perhaps the most painful thing of all was knowing that somewhere out there, Folake was at peace, living her life without him. She had found joy in her independence, while he had been left with nothing but memories and regrets. One evening, a knock came at his door. When he opened it, there was no visitor, just a small food container left on the doorpost. He lifted the lid and saw a steamy plate of rice, the kind Folake used to make. A note was stuck inside. "I forgave you long ago, Ade, but forgiveness does not mean returning to my suffering. Take care of yourself." Tears slipped down Ade's face as he clutched the note to his chest. He had lost her forever, and now all he had left were the bitter lessons of his own foolishness. And so, the great Ade Johnson, the man who thought he could control fate, was left to sit in his small, lonely apartment, learning too late that some mistakes could never be undone. Moral lesson from this story: pride and foolishness lead to regret. Ade Johnson believed he could discard his loyal wife for a younger woman without facing any consequences. However, his arrogance and pride blinded him to the reality that true love and loyalty cannot be bought. In the end, his choice led to loneliness and suffering, teaching us that pride can destroy even the strongest of foundations. 2. Not every mistake can be fixed. Though Ade sought forgiveness, some wounds run too deep to heal completely. Folake forgave him, but she refused to return to a life of pain. This teaches us that while forgiveness is powerful, it does not erase the consequences of our action. Some mistakes leave scars that time cannot undo, and we must think carefully before making choices that could cost us everything. If you have enjoyed this story, leave us a comment. Let us know what lesson you have learned from this story. Give us a like and share to friends and family. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please do so. And don't forget to hit the notification button so you will be the first to be notified when we put up a new story. Thank you for listening. See you in our next story.